Good morning. I want to welcome everyone here today. I am New York State Senate Republican leader Rob Ord. I'm joined by most of my colleagues. It's a Monday, so we got people coming in, and I know people have a lot of meetings Monday morning. Thankfully, we're also, I'm pleased to welcome back our finance ranker, Senator O'Mara, who's been sitting through budget hearing after budget hearing after budget hearing. Not just sitting, he's been participating, I can assure you, that, as the tape would say. But speaking of sort of budgets, we're here to talk about something more close to home for most New Yorkers, which is their personal budgets. And we hear a lot about affordability. We hear a lot about making New York more affordable for working families, for middle-class families. How do we put more money in people's pockets? Unfortunately, our colleagues on the Democratic side of the aisle here in New York very rarely follow through on actually putting more money back in people's pockets, actually making things a little more affordable. Now, during the presidential campaign, we heard President Trump talk a lot about no tax on tips. And I'm pleased to be joined by my colleague, Senator Jack Martins from Nassau County, and you're going to also hear from Senator Steve Rhodes, also from Nassau, talking about two bills that would remove tax on tips and tax on overtime earnings. And this is to me, this is a huge deal. This is something that I think has broad support across certainly anyone who works for tips, anyone who works hard and works overtime, multiple shifts. But I think it has broad support across many, demographics. Whether or not you're in the hospitality industry, I think people understand that allowing people to keep more of their money, and a tip is really, you get good service from somebody, whether it's at a hotel, whether it's at a restaurant, you're tipping that person for what they're doing. That's really, to me, is separate and apart from their salary. And of course, for many of our restaurant workers, what they actually make is very minimal. Their actual salary, that most of what their earnings, it is tipped earning. And I think this is a great way. My colleagues across the aisle always talk about leading. We're going to lead in New York. Well, this is a way for us to lead. I know they're talking about this at the federal level, but why should we wait? Why not lead by example? Why not show the men and women who work for tips, the men and women who work countless of hours of overtime, missing time away from their family? Why not send a message to those individuals, those hardworking New Yorkers? By my count, this would impact about 1 million hardworking New Yorkers across the state of New York. It would put $1.2 billion back in their pockets. That is real relief, that is real money, and that is a sign that the people in Albany understand what they're dealing with. Because that's what I hear all the time, is they just don't really get it. So I want to thank my colleagues who are joining me here today. I want to thank Senator Martins, who introduced both of these bills. He can talk, more to the specifics and maybe what went into his thought, but he brought this up to our conference, and I knew everyone from our conference was going to be on board and supportive of this idea. I hope it happens at the federal level. I hope it does, and I think it very well may. But why should New York, as I've often heard from my colleagues across the aisle, on any number of bad laws, why should we wait? Let's be a leader. Well, okay, here's a chance for New York to lead for working people across this state on these two bills, no tax on tips and no tax on overtime. And to speak next, I want to introduce the sponsor of these bills, someone who I know cares deeply about these two issues and who can go into more details, and that is Senator Jack Martins.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. We all talk about affordability. We've heard it. I think we've heard the majority speak about it. We certainly heard the governor speak about it. These two bills provide real relief to people who need it. Over the last 4 years, the cost of living in this country and in the state has increased by nearly 25%. And yet, time and again, we forget those people who are most vulnerable. And if you look at it, people who are earning tip wages are in that category. Predominantly women, socioeconomically challenged communities, just trying to make ends meet. And so these bills will allow them to actually keep their own money. And as an incentive, it's something that we should embrace here in New York State. I go back several years. I was walking door to door. We do that when we campaign. And I had a lady stop me at the door and said, "Do you believe in the dignity of the working man?" It's a profound question when you're walking door to door and it's probably 20 degrees out and someone asks you that question. But that's what this bill is about. It's about the dignity of the working person and the ability of that person to keep their own money. So whether we're talking about a restaurant worker who's receiving a tip, whether we're talking about a construction worker, a laborer, a carpenter who's putting in overtime and is able to hold on to the benefit of that, or a correction officer who's being asked to work 2 or 3 shifts in a row and is able to actually have the benefit of that work and provide that to their family, this cuts across every community in New York State. Whether it's organized labor, building trades, our government employees, the hospitality workers, there is no segment of our communities that isn't impacted in a positive way by New York State saying, you earned it, you keep it. And so, yes, I hope the federal government does what they promised to do, frankly, in a bipartisan way, because not that far after President Trump said that he wanted this to happen in a speech in Las Vegas, Vice President Kamala Harris also said that she supported it. So there should be no objection. This should be a no-brainer. And frankly, here we are. It's the 3rd of March. We have a budget due in 4 weeks. What better way to send a message to New York State residents that we want to help with this affordability crisis than to actually make a difference in allowing tip workers and those who earn overtime to keep what they've earned. And I encourage the governor and our colleagues here in the Senate and across the building in the Assembly to make this a priority as we put together the finishing touches on our budget this year. So, Leader, thank you very much for the opportunity. I want to thank my colleagues for their support. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Steve Rhodes, who's our ranker on the Labor Committee. Senator?
Thank you. Thank you, and let's have another big hand for Senator Jack Martins. What 2 wonderful bills. And thank you for being such a leader on this issue. And our leader, Senator Ort, said it so well. We need someone to lead. The problem is the majority caucus, the Democrats in both the Senate and the Assembly, have been leading. And they have led 1.5 million New Yorkers out of New York to places like North Carolina, Florida, Texas, over the course of the last 10 years. It is time for someone to lead from the front and lead for the benefit of working-class New Yorkers. In our conference, we have a belief that government should only take as much money as is necessary to perform the vital functions of government. We don't produce anything. New York State does not produce anything. Every dollar we spend is a dollar that comes out of the pocket of working class New Yorkers. And that's why we always talk about affordability. But what all too often happens here in the state capitol is that no one does anything about affordability. And today we have an opportunity to do that. And what better way to put money back into the pockets of working class New Yorkers than not to take it in the first place? We have a budget, $252 billion, an over $8 billion increase from last year's budget. By the way, without any substantial source of additional revenue. What does that mean? That means in the governor's proposed budget, we are taking in $8 billion more than we need to fund last year's state government. But what do? What does the governor do? The governor is doing what the governor always does. Takes that extra money and spends it, when that money should be returned to the people who produced it in the first place, the taxpayers. And so this bill does exactly that. At $1.2 billion, it puts $1.2 billion back into the pockets of families who need it. It's not just the wealthy that are fleeing New York, because we go around our districts, every single one of us, every day, talking to families who are saying, I'm working 2 jobs. My wife is working. Daycare is incredibly expensive. But we still can't make ends meet. How much more am I supposed to work? Well, if you're working overtime, if you're working for tips, you should be able to keep those dollars, and it should be our responsibility to make sure that you do, instead of funding some other program or finding another way to spend that money. And so that's what this bill is about, putting money back into the pockets of working families all across New York State, over 1 million working families all across New York State. That is real leadership. And I want to thank Senator Martins for sponsoring these bills, for our leader in taking the charge on behalf of the Republican conference to persuade the leaders in both houses, the Senate and the Assembly, and the governor, to finally take steps to benefit working-class New Yorkers, to stop talking about action, start taking action, and provide relief to taxpayers that desperately need it. So thank you for your leadership.
Well, thank you, Senator Rhodes and Senator Martins and our entire conference who is here today on this issue. This will remain a signature issue for this conference, a signature piece of our policy agenda going forward, and this will not be the last time we talk about it unless it is passed, and the next time you hear us, we'll be talking about it on the floor of the Senate, hopefully, or in the budget. But as Senator Martins pointed out, and I'll close with this, this should be a bipartisan thing. Democrats, Vice President Harris, you know, it was in the throes of the campaign, but I know she didn't agree on everything with President Trump, but she definitely agreed on this, and I think she agreed on it because she knew this was the right thing to do, and it was widely supported by the voting public, and whether that's in New York or Las Vegas or California, I bet if you pulled this issue, the numbers would come back overwhelmingly strong, and there's a reason for that. So hopefully we'll see some movement on this, but again, I want to thank Senator Martins for bringing the bills forward so that we have an actual piece of legislation to talk about in relation to this and not just conceptually.